The year 1909 was a wound festering on the soul of New York City. The streets were an endless churning river of humanity, a miasma of steam, coal smoke, and the stale, desperate scent of 1,000 unfulfilled dreams. For Elias Thorne, a hack driver by trade and a ghost by choice, this city was both his prison and his salvation. He was a man in his late 30s, his face etched with a perpetual weariness that had nothing to do with the long hours and everything to do with the past he carried like an anvil around his neck. His past was a forgotten place, a locked box in his mind, and he had promised himself he would never look inside it again. Elias's taxi, a sturdy Ford Model T, was his sanctuary. The rumble of its engine and the rattle of its tin frame were the only companions he allowed. He worked the graveyard shift, when the city's cacophony quieted to a low, sinister hum. It was during these hours that the real New York came alive, a city of shadows and secrets. The rain started around midnight, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the cobblestone streets into greasy, reflective rivers. The gas lamps cast long, distorted shadows, and the whole city seemed to melt into a watercolor painting of misery. Elias had been circling the financial district, a place that felt hollow and spectral at night. He was tired, his bones aching with a deep cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He was about to call it a night when he saw her. She stood on the corner of Wall Street and William, a slight, frail figure in a sodden woolen coat. She had no umbrella, no hat, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was small, perhaps no older than 12 or 13, and she didn't look like she belonged there. No one in that part of the city at this hour looked so utterly lost. Elias hesitated. He had a rule: no late-night passengers, especially not children. The city was a predator, and he had no desire to play the protector. But there was something in her stillness, a profound and terrible fragility that pierced through his hardened shell. He pulled the taxi to the curb, the engine sputtering. The girl didn't turn to look at him. She simply opened the rear door and slid inside, the leather seat sighing under her weight. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable shiver. The air in his cab, already damp and cold, seemed to drop several more degrees. "Where to?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. She didn't answer. He glanced in the rearview mirror. What he saw made his blood run cold. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the dim light of the cab. Her features were delicate, a fine nose, thin lips, but her eyes, the word eyes didn't fit. Where her eyes should have been were two smooth, unblemished patches of skin, not scarred, not gouged out, just blank. They were like a doll's face, a porcelain-smooth horror that was both beautiful and utterly monstrous. Elias's grip tightened on the steering wheel. A wave of nausea washed over him, a primal fear that he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to scream, to shove her out of the cab and drive away, but he couldn't move. He was frozen, a deer in the face of an unknown predator. "You're not scared of me," she said, her voice soft, like a whisper on a dry autumn wind. It was not a question. Elias swallowed, a lump of dread stuck in his throat. I don't scare easily," he lied, his voice a thin thread. "Good," she replied, "because you're going to see things you won't like, things you've forgotten." The cryptic remark sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. He had spent his entire adult life forgetting the smoke, the screams, the terrible, unforgivable choice he had made. The girl's words felt like a key turning in that locked box in his mind, and he wanted to throw it away, to forget he ever had it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice hard. "Yes, you do," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "I need you to take me to the St. Vincent's orphanage. It's on 11th Street. He knew the place. It was a decrepit old building on the edge of the slums, a place he always drove around. never through. He didn't want to go there now, not with her, but something in her tone, a quiet authority that belied her age and her terrifying appearance, compelled him. He put the taxi in gear, the engine protesting against the cold. The ride was silent, a suffocating silence punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. Elias kept his eyes on the road, stealing a quick glance at the rearview mirror every so often, just to make sure she was still there. And she was, a pale spectre in the back seat, a living nightmare that was somehow real. As he drove, a strange unease began to creep into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen her before, the shape of her face, the way she sat so unnervingly still. A fleeting, horrifying memory flickered at the edge of his consciousness. A memory of a fire, of the acrid smell of smoke and burning wood, and the sound of children screaming. He slammed on the brakes, the taxi lurching to a stop in the middle of a deserted street. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, his voice ragged. I just need a minute." He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The memory faded, replaced by the chilling reality of the girl in his back seat. He was trapped, and for the first time in his life, Elias felt the terrifying possibility that his past wasn't just a memory he could outrun. It was a passenger in his cab, and it was taking him home. This is just the beginning of Elias's nightmare. To find out what happens next, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of The Blind Passenger. The St. Vincent's Orphanage was a mausoleum of broken promises and faded dreams. Its brick facade, once a hopeful red, had faded to a sickly ochre, and the windows were dark, hollow eyes staring out at a world that had forgotten it. Elias pulled the taxi to a stop across the street, the rain still drumming a relentless beat on the roof. The silence in the cab was a living thing, a coiled snake waiting to strike. "This is it," Elias said, his voice flat. He turned to look at her, a strange, morbid curiosity warring with his terror. She was staring straight ahead, not at the orphanage, but at something unseen, her eyeless face a mask of serene emptiness. "The fare is $1.50. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled $10 bill. She held it out to him without looking. "Keep the change," she said, her voice a whisper. "You'll need it." Elias took the bill, his fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was impossibly cold, like marble, and the shock of it made him flinch. He watched as she pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain, the downpour instantly soaking her thin coat. She didn't run, didn't hurry. She simply walked across the street, a ghost moving towards its own grave. He waited, the engine still running, his heart a frantic drumbeat in his chest. He watched as she reached the massive, ornate wooden door of the orphanage. She didn't knock. The door simply creaked open a few inches as if it had been waiting for her. She slipped inside, and the door swung shut with a muffled final thud. Elias sat there for a long time, the rhythmic patter of the rain the only sound. The $10 bill felt heavy and wrong in his hand. He looked at it, then at the dark, silent building. Something wasn't right. The orphanage had been shuttered for years, a relic of a time when the city was a different kind of cruel. He had heard rumors, stories of a terrible fire, of children lost in the flames, but they were just stories, weren't they? He had always told himself they were. He had to know. He had to prove to himself that this was all a trick of his tired mind. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence deafening. He opened his door and stepped out into the biting rain, the cold instantly seeping into his bones. He walked across the street, the cobblestones slick beneath his worn shoes. The orphanage door was still shut, a blank, menacing slab of wood. He reached out and pushed it. To his surprise, it yielded, swinging open with a slow, mournful groan. He peered inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust, decay, and something else. something cloying and sweet like burnt sugar. The front hall was a cavern of shadows, the grand staircase spiraling into a darkness so profound it felt like a physical weight. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a hoarse whisper. Only the echo answered, mocking him. He stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind him. The sound of the street vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. He fumbled in his pocket for a match. The small, sputtering flame cast long, dancing shadows, turning the empty hall into a gallery of grotesque shapes. The girl was nowhere to be seen. He walked down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He passed a row of empty rooms, the doors ajar, each one a gaping maw of darkness. He reached a large room, what looked like a library. The shelves were empty, the books presumably having been sold off years ago. But in the center of the room, on the dusty floor, was a small, ornate music box. Elias bent down and picked it up. It was old, its wood a dark, polished mahogany, and on its lid a small, intricate carving of a girl with a missing eye. He felt a jolt of recognition, a faint, sickening echo of a memory he couldn't place. He turned the crank on the side, and a thin, tinkling melody began to play. It was a lullaby, a hauntingly familiar tune that sent shivers down his spine. As the music played, he saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible handprint on the dusty surface of the music box. It was small, a child's handprint, and there was something wrong with it. The fingers were too long, too slender, and the palm was impossibly narrow. It was the handprint of a child who had never seen the sun. He dropped the music box, the music dying with a final, mournful chime. He backed away, his heart pounding against his ribs. This was a nightmare, a sick joke. The orphanage was supposed to be empty, but the air was heavy with a presence, a cold, watching stillness that felt like 1,000 eyes on his back. He turned and ran, not a hack driver in his late 30s, but a terrified boy in a dark, empty house. He ran out of the orphanage, the door swinging shut with a final echoing slam. He didn't stop until he was back in his cab, the engine roaring to life. He drove away, the $10 bill clutched so tightly in his hand that it was a crumpled, damp ruin. The girl wasn't a ghost. He knew that much now. Her cold skin, her physical presence in the cab, the money in his hand, it was all real. But what she was, what she wanted, remained a terrifying mystery. The memory of her eyeless face, of her impossibly cold hand, was burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen her before, not in a memory, but in a photograph, a newspaper clipping. He drove aimlessly through the city, the rain finally beginning to let up. The first hint of dawn, a pale, sickly gray, was beginning to touch the horizon. He needed to find answers. He needed to know who she was and why she had chosen him. He thought of the handprint on the music box, of the eerie lullaby. He thought of the orphanage, a place that should have been silent and dead, but was instead a tomb full of whispers. He was no longer just a driver trying to make a living. He was a man chasing a ghost, a very real, very unsettling ghost with no eyes. And he had a terrible, sinking feeling that the past he had so carefully buried was about to rise from its grave and claim him. The $10 bill was a heavy weight, a promise of a journey he didn't want to take. He looked at it, then at the empty passenger seat. The terrifying emptiness felt like a presence, a chilling reminder of the girl he had picked up in the rain, the one who knew his secrets. His mind reeled, sifting through years of buried memories. A fire, a terrible choice, a name. He couldn't quite grasp it. It was like trying to hold smoke. But he had a lead now, a fragile thread of a connection. He had to find out what happened at the St. Vincent's orphanage. He had to find out who she was. And as the sun rose over the city, Elias Thorne, a man who had dedicated his life to running from the past, began his terrifying descent into the very heart of his own darkness. Elias spent the next 3 days in a fog of sleepless anxiety. The memory of the eyeless girl, her unnervingly smooth face, and the chilling encounter at the orphanage replayed in his mind like a broken record. He couldn't work. Every taxi that passed, every fleeting glimpse of a lone figure in the rain, sent a jolt of panic through him. He was a man unmoored, his sanctuary of routine and self-imposed isolation shattered. The $10 bill, still crumpled and damp, lay on his kitchen table, a constant menacing reminder. He ran his hand over it, the feel of the paper a stark contrast to the cold marble-like skin he remembered. The girl had said he'd need the change. He had kept it, a fool's hope that it was just a strange encounter and nothing more. But the music box, the handprint, the terrible feeling of being watched, it was all too real. He had to get answers. The St. Vincent's orphanage was the key. He had to find out what had happened there, and he knew just the place to start. The city's archives, a dusty, forgotten building on a side street in the Bowery. He had a friend there, a grizzled old man named Silas, who had been working with historical records for 50 years. Silas was a living encyclopedia of New York's sordid past. Elias arrived at the archives just as the morning sun was burning off the last of the rain. The building smelled of old paper and wood rot, a scent that was both comforting and melancholic. He found Silas hunched over a large ledger, his spectacles perched on the tip of his nose. "Elias," Silas said, looking up, a rare smile on his wrinkled face. "I haven't seen you in a year. What brings you to this tomb of forgotten souls?" "I need to know about the St. Vincent's orphanage," Elias said, getting straight to the point. "The fire. The one that happened. When was it?" Silas's smile faded. His eyes, though magnified by his glasses, held a somber depth. "That's a nasty bit of history, son. You sure you want to dig that up?" "I have to," Elias insisted. I think I know someone who was there." Silas didn't ask questions. He knew Elias was a man who kept his past locked away. He got up and walked to a long row of filing cabinets, their metal a tarnished gray. He pulled out a drawer with a screech, and a cloud of dust billowed into the air. He began sifting through faded newspaper clippings and brittle documents. "Ah, here it is," Silas said, pulling out a sheaf of papers tied with a thin, brittle string. "The St. Vincent's orphanage fire happened on October 23rd, 1899. A little over 10 years ago. It was a terrible tragedy." He handed Elias the clippings. The headlines were sensational, the language florid and dramatic. "Orphanage Inferno claims 11 children. A city in mourning. Unspeakable horror on 11th Street." Elias's hands trembled as he read. The details were sparse, but the tragedy was clear. A fire had broken out in the middle of the night. The building was old, a tinderbox, and the flames had spread with terrifying speed. The fire department had arrived too late. The clippings mentioned a heroic effort by a few of the older boys to save the younger children, but in the end, 11 children had perished. "The police report," Silas said, pulling out another document. "They couldn't figure out the cause. Said it was a fault in the old wiring. A terrible accident." Elias's eyes scanned the names of the victims, a chilling list of young lives cut short. He read them over and over, his mind searching for a connection. He got to the end of the list and his breath hitched. The last name was Lillian. No last name was given, just Lillian. Age 12. Lillian. The same name the girl had given him. He felt a wave of cold dread wash over him, a physical blow to the gut. The girl in his cab couldn't be a ghost. Ghosts weren't real. But she was 12 years old, just as the Lillian in the article was, and she had no eyes. He looked at the details of the fire report. Cause of death, smoke inhalation and severe burns. The report made no mention of her eyes. He had to find a different source. "Silas," Elias said, his voice a strained whisper. "Are there any other records? Personal records? Photos?" Silas looked at him, his brow furrowed with concern. "They're sealed, Elias. personal records of the deceased, privacy laws, even for orphans. "Please, Silas," Elias pleaded. "I have to see them. This is important. It's life or death." Silas sighed, a sound of resigned weariness. He knew Elias wasn't a man who made such requests lightly. He walked to a different filing cabinet, its lock rusted with age. He took a key from his keychain and fumbled with the lock. The drawer screeched open, revealing a stack of old, brown folders. He pulled out a folder, its label barely legible. St. Vincent's Fire. Victim Records. He handed it to Elias. "Don't let anyone see this, son. This is a big risk." Elias nodded, his heart pounding. He opened the folder. Inside were old photographs, black and white snapshots of smiling children, their faces full of a life that was now long gone. He went through them one by one, a gallery of the dead. He saw a boy with a mischievous grin, a girl with long braids, a baby cradled in the arms of an older child. And then he saw her. The photograph was small, faded at the edges. It was a portrait of a girl no older than 12. She had long, dark hair and a serious, somber expression. Her eyes were dark, shadowed pools, but they were there. She had eyes. Elias felt a cold confusion wash over him. The girl in his cab had no eyes. Her face was smooth. The Lillian in the photograph looked nothing like her. He felt a pang of disappointment, a strange sense of relief. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe she was just a disturbed girl, a runaway, and the name was a macabre coincidence. He was about to close the folder when he saw it, a small, handwritten note tucked into the back of the folder. It was a note from one of the nuns who had worked at the orphanage. It was a personal note, a lament for the lost children. He read it, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The nun wrote about the tragedy, about the beautiful children she had lost. And then she wrote about Lillian. "Sweet Lillian," the note read. "So brave. She got the other children out, but she was trapped. Her last words, 'I will never forget them.' Please, Mother Superior," she begged. "Tell them my brother will come for me. He promised he would." Her brother's name, what was it? He was a young boy who had been adopted a few years prior. She was convinced he would come back. Her brother, what was his name? The note ended there, a final heartbreaking question. Elias's hands trembled so violently he almost dropped the folder. He felt the locked box in his mind, the one he had so carefully sealed away, splintering. He could see it, feel it, the past rushing back at him like a tidal wave. The fire, the screams, the boy who had been adopted, the boy who had been taken away. His mind screamed the name, a whisper of a memory he had fought to bury. The name of the boy who had been adopted, the boy who had been promised a new life. The boy who had promised his sister he would come back for her, Elias Thorne. He was the boy. He was the brother. Lillian was his sister. The girl with no eyes was not a coincidence, not a stranger. She was the ghost of a promise he had broken, a living, breathing testament to his guilt. The memory of the fire, the acrid smell of smoke, the screams of the children, it wasn't just a memory, it was a confession. He had survived the fire, but he had left her behind. He had left her to die. The eyeless girl wasn't a figment of his imagination. She was the physical manifestation of his guilt, a monster born of his own cowardice. The $10 bill wasn't a fare. It was a payment for a debt he could never repay. He had to find her. He had to know why she had come back. But he had a horrifying suspicion. She hadn't come for an explanation. She had come for justice. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow. The face he had spent his life trying to forget was his own reflection. And the ghost of his past had a name. Lillian, his sister. He stumbled out of the archives, the folder clutched in his trembling hands. The bustling streets of New York, once a familiar comfort, now felt alien and menacing. Every face in the crowd seemed to know his secret. Every whisper in the wind seemed to echo his name. He had to find her. The truth was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was a matter of survival. She knew his name. She knew his secret. And she was a living, breathing paradox, a girl who had died in a fire 10 years ago, yet had stood in his taxi, her cold hand brushing his. He had to find out how this was possible, how she could be both dead and alive. His first stop was the address listed in his adoption papers, the home of the family that had taken him in, the Thorns. They had been a wealthy, childless couple, and they had given him a new name, a new life, and a new story. They had told him his family had died in a fire. They had told him it was an accident. They had never mentioned Lillian. They had made him forget. The Thorn mansion was in a more respectable part of the city, a quiet, tree-lined street of brownstones and wrought-iron fences. It was a world away from the grimy streets of the Bowery. He stood on the sidewalk, a stranger in a land he had once called home. The house was a monument to a life he had never truly owned. He walked up the steps and knocked on the door. It was a risk, a dangerous gamble. The Thorns had cut him off years ago, disgusted by his choice to become a hack driver, a blue-collar worker. They had seen it as a betrayal of their kindness, a rejection of the life they had given him. He had never looked back, until now. The door was answered by an elderly woman in a starched apron, her face a map of wrinkles. She didn't recognize him at first. "Mrs. Dawson," Elias said. "It's Elias Thorn." Her eyes widened in surprise, and then a flicker of something else, disappointment, disapproval. "Mr. Elias," she said, her voice stiff, "I haven't seen you since the master passed. Is anyone home?" he asked. "No, sir," she replied. "The master and mistress have both passed. The house is being sold. I'm just here to pack up the last of their things." A pang of regret, a cold sense of finality, washed over him. He had waited too long. The only people who knew the truth, the people who had erased his past, were gone. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need to ask you something. Do you remember when they adopted me? Do you remember a little girl? My sister?" Her face, already pale with age, turned ashen. Her hands, which had been resting on the folds of her apron, began to tremble. "Mr. Elias," she whispered, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," he pressed. "I need to know. What happened to her?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. I can't talk about it. The master and mistress, they forbade it. They said it was a terrible secret. They said it was better left buried." "Buried," he repeated, a sense of dread tightening in his stomach. "What did they bury?" "They had a separate record," she said, her voice barely audible. "A box. They kept it locked in the study. They said it was for the good of everyone, for your good." He felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. A box, a record, a terrible secret. It was the other half of the story, the part the Thorns had kept from him. "Where is it?" he asked. "Where's the study?" She pointed a shaky finger down the hall. "The last door on the left." He didn't wait for her to object. He strode down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, empty house. He found the study, its door slightly ajar. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. He fumbled for a light switch and found one, the single bulb in the ceiling casting a weak, yellow glow. He saw the desk, a massive mahogany slab, its surface covered in a fine layer of dust. He went to the desk, his eyes scanning for a lock, a secret compartment. He found a small locked drawer at the bottom. He tried to open it, but it was sealed. He ran his hand over the wood, searching for a release mechanism. He found a loose piece of molding on the side of the desk. He pried it loose with his fingers, revealing a small, hidden keyhole. He had no key. He had no choice but to break the lock. He grabbed a heavy paperweight from the top of the desk and slammed it against the drawer. The wood splintered, the lock giving way with a loud snap. He pulled the drawer open. Inside, nestled among a few loose papers, was a small, locked metal box. He tried to force the box open, but the lid was sealed tight. He had to go back to the archives. He had to find a way to open it. He put the box in his pocket, the cold metal a physical weight against his thigh. He was about to leave when he saw something else in the drawer. A small, black and white photograph. He pulled it out. It was a picture of him, a boy of perhaps 8 years old with a bright, innocent smile. But the boy in the picture was standing with another boy, a younger boy. A boy with dark, piercing eyes and a strange, almost unsettling smile. The boy was holding a toy, a small, intricate music box. Elias felt a new kind of terror. He didn't know the boy. He had never seen him before. Who was he? Was he an orphan? Was he part of the fire? He turned the photo over. The back was blank. He left the study, the metal box in his pocket, a new mystery to solve. He walked past Mrs. Dawson, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and pity. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Mr. Elias," she said, her voice low. "But some secrets are better left buried. They have a way of coming back to haunt you." Elias knew that all too well. His past wasn't buried. It was alive, and it had a face with no eyes. He had to open the box. He had to find out what was inside. He had a terrible suspicion the box held the real story of the fire, the real reason the thorns had taken him away and made him forget. And he had a chilling suspicion that the boy in the photograph was connected to the girl with no eyes, and to a truth more sinister than he could have ever imagined. Elias returned to the archives, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and terrifying possibilities. The metal box in his pocket felt like a lead weight, a Pandora's box he was both desperate and terrified to open. He found Silas in his usual spot, hunched over a new ledger. "Silas, I need a tool," Elias said, his voice strained. "A crowbar. Something to open a box." Silas looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "What did you get yourself into, Elias?" Elias didn't answer. He just held up the box. Silas took one look at it, then at the desperate look in Elias's eyes, and nodded. He led Elias to a back room, a storage closet filled with old tools and forgotten junk. He handed Elias a small, sturdy crowbar. Elias took the box and the crowbar, his hands trembling. He placed the box on a small, rickety table and jammed the crowbar into the seam. He put all his weight into it. The metal bent, groaned, and with a final protesting shriek, the lid popped open. Inside, there was a stack of papers, all yellowed with age, and a small leather-bound diary. Elias's hands were shaking so hard he could barely pick them up. The papers were a series of letters, written in a fine, spidery hand. He looked at the signature on the bottom of the first letter, Dr. Alistair Finch. He remembered the name. Dr. Finch was a prominent doctor in New York, a pioneer in the field of psychology, which in 1909 was a new, controversial science. The letters were addressed to his adoptive father, Mr. Thorne. Elias began to read, his heart sinking with every word. The letters were a macabre confession, a twisted chronicle of a horrifying experiment. Dr. Finch had been a family friend of the Thornes. He was a man obsessed with the human psyche, with the malleability of memory. The letters revealed that Elias hadn't been an orphan they had simply adopted. He had been a subject, an unwilling participant in a psychological experiment. Dr. Finch had been fascinated by Elias's trauma, his amnesia after the fire. He had proposed a radical, disturbing theory, that memory wasn't a static record, but a fluid narrative that could be rewritten. The Thornes, desperate to erase Elias's painful past and give him a new, unburdened life, had agreed to the experiment. The letters detailed the process. Elias was subjected to a series of psychological treatments, a combination of hypnosis, and a new experimental drug that Dr. Finch called amnesia. The drug, a potent sedative and hallucinogen, was designed to suppress the formation of new memories and make the patient more susceptible to suggestion. The goal was to erase the memory of the fire, of his sister, of his old life. Dr. Finch wrote about his success, his triumph in creating a new man, a new identity. He wrote about Elias's mind as a canvas and himself as the artist, painting over the painful memories with a new, fabricated life. He wrote about Lillian too. He mentioned her as an unfortunate anomaly, a ghost in the machine that he couldn't quite extinguish. He wrote about a boy who came with Elias, a boy named Finn, a boy who had a strange, almost preternatural connection to Lillian, a boy he called the Catalyst. Elias's hands were shaking so violently he had to stop reading. The boy in the photograph. Finn. Who was he? He looked at the letters again, scanning for more information about him. Dr. Finch had taken a special interest in Finn. He had subjected him to a different kind of experiment, a series of treatments designed to enhance his psychic connection to Lillian, to use him as a sort of beacon for her memory. But the experiment had gone wrong. Finn had a break with reality, and the Thorns, terrified of the consequences, had sent him to an asylum. Elias's head was spinning. He had been a puppet, a pawn in a cruel, depraved game. The Thorns hadn't been saviors. They had been accomplices. They hadn't given him a new life. They had stolen his old one. And Lillian, his sister, wasn't just a victim of a fire. She was a victim of a psychological experiment that had gone horribly, terrifyingly wrong. He opened the small, leather-bound diary. It was Lillian's. The first entries were childish, filled with the simple joys and sorrows of a little girl in an orphanage. She wrote about her brother, Elias, about how he was her best friend, her protector. She wrote about his adoption and her belief that he would come back for her. And then the entries changed. The handwriting became shaky, the tone desperate. She wrote about a man, a doctor who came to the orphanage. He had strange, unsettling eyes. He would talk to her, ask her about her brother, about her memories. He had a way of looking at her that made her skin crawl. He had promised to help her find her brother. He had promised to fix her. The last entry was dated the day of the fire. He said he was going to make me forget, she wrote, the words almost illegible. He said if I couldn't be with my brother, I would be with him forever. He gave me a special medicine. It tasted like ash. I feel sleepy. I feel like my eyes are closing and they won't open again. I see him. The boy. He's smiling. The boy with no eyes. Elias's mind reeled. The boy with no eyes. Not her. The boy from the photograph. The boy named Finn. Dr. Finch hadn't been trying to erase Lillian's memories. He had been trying to merge them. He had been trying to transfer them to Finn, a boy he had treated with an entirely different kind of experimental drug. Finn wasn't a victim of a psychological breakdown. He was a victim of a grotesque attempt to create a living memory, a living ghost. The terrifying truth was now clear. Lillian hadn't just died in the fire. She had been subjected to a horrifying experiment. And Finn, the boy in the photograph, was a living vessel for her memories, her thoughts, her pain. He was the catalyst, the beacon Dr. Finch had spoken of. The girl with no eyes was not a girl at all. It was a boy. It was Finn. He had her memories, her voice, her knowledge of Elias's past. The $10 bill in his pocket, the money from the girl with no eyes, suddenly took on a new, horrifying significance. He hadn't just given him money. He had given him a piece of his sister, a chilling payment for a debt he owed. The lullaby from the music box, the handprint on the dusty floor. It was all from her. A desperate plea for him to remember, to find her, to find the truth. Elias felt a cold, hard knot of rage and grief. His parents had not just betrayed him. They had conspired to murder his sister, to erase her from his memory. He had to find Finn. He had to find the asylum Dr. Finch had sent him to. He had to find a way to save him, to give him a sense of peace, to give his sister's memory the justice she deserved. The journey wasn't about him anymore. It was about them. It was about the two children he had left behind, the two victims of a man's mad ambition. The asylum, or as it was more fittingly called, the Institute for the Mind, was a sprawling Gothic building on the outskirts of the city. The place looked like a castle designed by a madman, its stone walls stained with a century of rain and despair. Elias stood before the iron gates, a sense of cold dread washing over him. The thorns had sealed Finn away here, a living tomb for a terrible secret. He walked up to the main entrance, his heart pounding against his ribs. The front door, a heavy oak slab, was opened by a gaunt, somber-faced man in a white orderly's uniform. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm here to see a patient," Elias said, his voice as calm as he could make it. "His name is Finn. He was admitted here a few years ago. He was a patient of Dr. Finch." The orderly's eyes narrowed. Dr. Finch's patients are no longer a matter of record. The doctor's methods were controversial. We have new protocols now. "I have to see him," Elias insisted. "He's my family. I have a court order." He was bluffing, but he had to try. The orderly hesitated for a moment, then a flicker of pity crossed his face. "Follow me," he said, his voice a low grumble. He led Elias down a long, dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with the smell of Lysol and despair. He heard muffled cries from behind closed doors, a low, constant murmur of torment. The patients here weren't being healed. They were being held. They stopped at a heavy metal door at the end of the hall. The orderly unlocked it with a jangle of keys. "He's in here," he said, his voice a low whisper. "He's a different kind of patient. He has good days and bad days. The bad ones, he thinks he's someone else." Elias's heart sank. He knew exactly who Finn thought he was. The room was small and bare, with a single cot and a small window high on the wall, barred with heavy iron. The light from the window cast long, prison-like shadows. Elias saw him. He was huddled in a corner, his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking back and forth. He was older than he was in the photograph, a young man in his late teens or early 20s, but his face was the same, a perfect match for the boy in the picture. He had the same dark, piercing eyes, the same unsettling smile. But the eyes were empty now, haunted by a pain too terrible to comprehend. "Finn," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. Finn didn't look up. He just continued to rock, a low, mournful hum coming from his lips. It was a tune, a lullaby. The same lullaby from the music box. Elias walked slowly towards him, his heart aching with a grief he had suppressed for years. "Finn," he said again, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "My name is Elias. I'm your brother, Lillian's brother." Finn's rocking stopped. He slowly raised his head, his eyes dark and empty, focusing on Elias. He looked at him, not with recognition, but with a vacant, chilling stillness. And then he smiled. It was the same unsettling smile from the photograph, but now it was filled with a chilling, knowing emptiness. And then he spoke. But the voice that came out of his mouth was not a young man's voice. It was a young girl's. It was Lillian's. "I told you he would come," she said, her voice a soft, eerie echo in the small room. "I told them he would come for me." Elias felt a wave of nausea. This was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. The physical reality of the girl in his taxi, the undeniable fact of his past, was a crushing weight on his sanity. "Lillian," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. They made me forget." The smile on Finn's face widened. "Oh, I know," he said in her voice. "He was very good at his work, that doctor. He was very good at making you forget, but he wasn't good enough. The memory is still there, in here. He tapped his temple with a long, slender finger. How is this possible? Elias whispered, "How are you here?" "He tried to take the memory from me," she said, her voice a chilling sing-song. "He tried to put it in him. He wanted to make me a part of him, but he made a mistake. He didn't take it all. He left a piece of me, the best part." She paused and the smile on his face faded, replaced by a look of profound sadness. "The part that knows you, the part that remembers the fire, the part that knows you left me behind." Elias felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "I didn't leave you. I didn't know you were there." "You did," she said, her voice hardening. "You left me in the fire. You ran away. You made a new life. And now you're here. Why, did he send you?" "Who?" Elias asked, his heart pounding. "The man with the no eyes," she said, and her voice dropped to a low, menacing whisper. "The one who came after the fire, the one who finished his work." Elias looked at her, at the empty, haunted eyes of his past, and a new, terrible realization dawned on him. Dr. Finch hadn't been working alone. There was a second man, a man who had come after the fire, a man who had completed the terrible work of a mad doctor. The boy in the photograph, the boy who was supposed to be Finn. But if Finn was here, who was the boy in the photograph? Who was the boy with no eyes? The puzzle was becoming more and more complex, and more terrifying. Elias wasn't just chasing a ghost. He was chasing a conspiracy, a dark, tangled web of lies and murder. He had to find out who the boy was. He had to find out what happened to Lillian. He had to find the truth, even if it destroyed him. Because he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the only thing worse than living with the guilt of his past was living without the truth. The chilling revelation that the eyeless girl was in fact the boy from the photograph, Finn, was a psychic blow from which Elias couldn't recover. He had been so focused on finding Lillian's ghost, he had failed to see the very real, very tangible monster he had picked up in his taxi. Finn was a living testament to a crime more grotesque than he had ever imagined, a boy whose identity had been erased and replaced with the memories of a dead girl. Elias left the asylum, the image of Finn's haunted eyes and the sound of Lillian's voice a constant, tormenting presence in his mind. He had to find the third person, the one Lillian had spoken of, the one who had come after the fire, the man with no eyes. He was the key to this whole macabre puzzle. He had a lead now, a fragile thread of a connection. He had to go back to Dr. Finch's lab, a place mentioned in the letters from his father. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. The lab was in a disused medical building in an old, forgotten part of town, a place Elias had driven past 1,000 times without ever knowing the horrors it contained. The building was a dilapidated relic, its windows boarded up and its brick facade crumbling. Elias had to break in. He found a loose board on a side window and pried it open, the wood groaning in protest. He slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and rot, a silence so profound it felt like a presence. He made his way to the lab, a large room in the back of the building. It was a disturbing scene, a ghost of a scientific experiment. Glass vials stood in rows on a dusty counter, their contents a congealed, sickly green. The room was full of strange, archaic machines, their brass and copper fittings tarnished with age. On a large wooden table in the center of the room, there was a stack of files. Elias walked over to the table and began sifting through them. The files were a macabre inventory of Dr. Finch's experiments, his patients, and their psychological breakdowns. He found files on Elias, on Lillian, and on Finn, a detailed record of their trauma and their treatments. He found letters from the Thorns, letters from the asylum, and letters from a man named Mr. Corvus. Corvus. The name felt like a cold stone in his stomach. He was a new character in this horrifying play, a man whose name was linked to a bird of ill omen. The letters revealed a new, horrifying truth. Mr. Corvus was a partner of Dr. Finch, not in a professional sense, but in a personal one. He was a wealthy, reclusive man with a morbid fascination with the human psyche, a man who had funded Dr. Finch's experiments in exchange for a front-row seat to the madness. The letters also revealed that Mr. Corvus was a man with a dark secret of his own. He had been a victim of a horrible accident as a child, an accident that had left him with a disfiguring injury. The letters didn't say what the injury was, only that it was to his face, and it had left him without a sense of sight, a perpetual void. Elias's blood ran cold, the man with no eyes. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a physical reality. Mr. Corvus was blind, and he was the one who had come after the fire, the one who had finished his work. But what was his work? What had he done to Lillian and Finn? He continued to read, his heart pounding with a desperate urgency. The last letter was from Dr. Finch to Mr. Corvus, dated a week after the fire at St. Vincent's. The letter was a confession, a final, horrifying revelation. Dr. Finch wrote about his failure. His experiments had gone wrong. Lillian had resisted the drug, and her memories, instead of being transferred to Finn, had been amplified. They had become a physical presence, a living, tangible part of Finn's mind. The doctor wrote about his terror, his realization that he had created a monster, a living vessel for a vengeful ghost. He had a premonition of what Mr. Corvus would do. He wrote that he had a plan, a way to save Elias, to give him a new life, to erase his memory of the fire. He was going to expose Mr. Corvus, to bring him to justice. Elias looked at the date on the letter. The day after it was written, Dr. Finch had been found dead in his home, a supposed suicide. But Elias knew now that it was no suicide. It was murder. Mr. Corvus had silenced him. He had taken his last secret with him to the grave. But he had left one thing behind, a final chilling clue, a map of the city with a series of red circles drawn on it. Elias's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the paper. The circles were locations: the St. Vincent's orphanage, his own apartment building, the asylum, the Thorns mansion, and a last chilling location, a small, unassuming house on a quiet street on the other side of town. The house was a place Elias knew instinctively. It was the address of his old home, the home he had lived in before he was an orphan. The place where the fire had started. A sickening realization washed over him. The fire at St. Vincent's orphanage was not an accident. The fire at his own home, the one that had killed his parents, was not an accident. They were all connected. They were all the work of one man, Mr. Corvus. But why? What was his motive? He found the answer in a small, hidden folder at the bottom of the stack. It was a folder on a new patient, a young boy with dark, piercing eyes. A boy named Corvus, the same name as the man. The boy's file detailed his childhood, his parents, his home. The boy had been a patient of Dr. Finch, a young patient who had suffered from a traumatic brain injury in a terrible fire. A fire that had been set deliberately by his own parents. Elias's blood ran cold. Mr. Corvus was not just a spectator, he was a participant. The fire that had killed his parents had left him blind, but it had also left him with a vengeful, murderous rage. He had found a way to fix himself, to find a sense of peace. He had become a connoisseur of human pain, a collector of human suffering. And he had found a way to recreate his trauma, to make others suffer as he had suffered. He had set the fires. He had used Dr. Finch's experiments to manipulate the children, to create a living, breathing testament to his own pain. He had created a twisted mirror of his own tragedy. The girl with no eyes was a part of this. She was a living, breathing symbol of Mr. Corvus's twisted revenge. He had found a way to use Lillian's memory to torment Elias, to make him confront his past in the most horrifying way possible. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was the architect of a nightmare. He was the monster who had taken Elias's family, his memories, his sanity, and now he was coming for him. This is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning of the end. To find out what happens next, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of The Blind Passenger. The revelation of Mr. Corvus's identity as the architect of Elias's personal hell was a crushing weight. The world, once a complicated but navigable place, had dissolved into a chessboard where Elias was a mere pawn. The terrifying girl with no eyes, the haunted Finn, the fire at the orphanage, the suppression of his own memory. It was all the work of a single malevolent mind. The game wasn't over. It was about to enter its final, deadly phase. Elias knew where to go. The last address on the map, his old childhood home, was the beginning of his nightmare, and he had a terrifying premonition it would be the end as well. The street was familiar, a place that existed only in the hazy, forgotten corners of his mind. The house was old, its paint peeling, its windows dark and lifeless. It looked exactly as he remembered it, a place of peace and safety that had become a tomb. He walked up the front steps, a sense of cold, sick resignation settling in his stomach. The front door was unlocked, a silent invitation to a trap. He pushed it open, and the scent of burnt wood and ash, a smell he hadn't experienced in years, rushed out to meet him. The house was a monument to a fire that had happened long ago, but the air still held the chilling memory of the flames. "I knew you'd come," a voice said from the shadows. Elias froze. The voice was soft, melodic, but filled with a chilling, cold menace. He couldn't see the speaker. He was a disembodied voice in a house of ghosts. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice trembling. "Show yourself." A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his face a perfect oval, his features fine and chiseled. But his eyes were not there. He had the same smooth, eyeless patches of skin as Finn, a chilling, uncanny resemblance, the same disfigurement, the same emptiness. "Mr. Corvus, my name is Finn," the man said, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. "Mr. Finn Corvus. It's a family name, my mother's maiden name, to be precise. You remember my mother, don't you, Elias?" Elias's mind reeled. The boy in the photograph. The boy who was supposed to be Finn. The boy who was supposed to be in the asylum. The man was Finn. The boy had been taken from the fire, not by the thorns, but by his own mother, and she had raised him in secret, hiding his disfigurement from the world. "My mother. She was a patient of Dr. Finch," Finn said, his voice a low, silky whisper. "She told him all about my father, a terrible man who had abused her. She told him about the fire, how my father had tried to kill me, to make me a part of the fire just as he was. And Dr. Finch, he helped her. He made her a part of me, a living part of my memory." "You killed them," Elias said, his voice a strained whisper. "My parents, my sister." Finn's smile widened. "Not me, Elias. My mother. She was a vengeful woman. She wanted justice. She found a way to make them pay, to make their son suffer as she had suffered. She used me. She used Dr. Finch. And she used you. You were the perfect vessel, the perfect mark. The boy who had forgotten his past." "And the orphanage?" Elias asked. "Why them? Why Lillian?" "Lillian was a perfect target," Finn said, his voice a chilling monotone. "She was a girl who had been promised a new life, a girl who had a memory of a new life she would never have. My mother saw it as an act of cosmic justice. She used her. She used her to torment you, to make you remember. The girl with no eyes was a ghost, a physical manifestation of a memory you had tried to bury. She was my mother, in a way, a living vessel for a forgotten past. Elias was sickened. The whole thing was a grotesque, twisted revenge plot, a macabre play with real people as its actors. He was just a tool, a puppet for a woman's sick, depraved vendetta. "And Finn?" Elias asked. "The boy in the asylum. Who is he?" Finn's smile faded. His face became a mask of cold, unfeeling rage. "He is the failed experiment. He is the one who took Lillian's memories and made them his own. He is the one who has what I want. He has a sense of sight, a sense of touch, a sense of feeling. He has a piece of her love, a piece of her innocence, and I want it back. I want it all back." Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. Finn wasn't just a spectator. He was a collector of human suffering. He had used Lillian's memories to torture Elias, and now he wanted to use Finn's memories to get back what he had lost. He was a monster who had been created by a terrible trauma, and he was now a monster who was creating his own trauma in others. "What do you want?" Elias asked, his voice shaking. "I want you to bring him to me," Finn said. "I want you to bring him here. I want to take back what he stole from me. The memory of a new life, a life I should have had. The memory of a family that loved me, the memory of a sister who would have loved me." "I can't do that," Elias said, his voice firm. "He's not a thing, he's a person. He's Lillian's brother." Finn's smile returned, cold and cruel. "He's not her brother, Elias. You are, and you left her behind. You broke your promise. You walked away from her and made a new life. And now you're going to pay. You're going to suffer as I have suffered. You're going to lose everything you have, your sanity, your life, all of it." Elias felt a cold rush of adrenaline. He was no longer a victim. He was a target. And he had a choice to make. He could run, or he could fight. He had spent his entire life running. He wasn't going to run anymore. He had to save Finn. He had to save himself. He had to bring this monster to justice. Elias turned and ran, not from Finn, but to his taxi. He had to get to the asylum. He had to save Finn before it was too late. He had a weapon now, a piece of information that could bring down Finn Corvus. The evidence of his crimes, the letters, the diary, the photographs. He had to get them to the police. He had to expose this madman. He drove like a man possessed, the city streets a blur of lights and shadows. He had a plan, a desperate last-ditch effort to save a boy he had just met, a boy whose soul held the fragmented memories of his own sister. He arrived at the asylum just as the moon was setting, casting a pale spectral light on the old stone building. He found Finn's room empty. The bed was unmade, the window barred, the door ajar. Elias's heart sank. He was too late. Finn Corvus had already been here. He ran to the front desk, his voice a frantic whisper. "The boy in room 10, Finn. He's gone." The night orderly, a burly, sleepy man, looked at him with annoyance. "He left with his family, sir, a man who said he was his father." A very respectable-looking man, very polite. Elias's blood ran cold. Finn Corvus had been here. He had taken Finn, the boy, not by force, but by deception. He had played the part of a caring parent, a good man, and the asylum staff, blind to his true nature, had let him go. He ran back out to his taxi, his mind racing. Where would he go? The last address on the map. His old home. It was the only place he knew. It was the end game, the final act of a play that had been running for years. He had to get there, but he knew he couldn't fight Finn Corvus alone. He needed help. He drove to the nearest police station, a small, unassuming building on a side street. He burst in, his heart pounding, the evidence of Finn Corvus's crimes in his hand. He told the desk sergeant everything about the fires, the experiments, the conspiracies, about the man with no eyes who was a living ghost. The sergeant listened, his expression a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "Son," he said, his voice flat. "You're talking crazy. This is a lot of nonsense, a story for the newspapers." Elias threw the letters, the diary, the photographs onto the desk. "It's all here. The evidence, Dr. Finch's letters, the victim's diary, the photos. It's all here. The man is a murderer." The sergeant sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He picked up the letters and looked at them. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and his expression changed. He looked at the details, at the names, at the dates. He looked at the photographs, at the young Elias and the boy with no eyes. His face, once full of skepticism, now held a cold, professional curiosity. "Wait here," the sergeant said, his voice low and serious. "I'm going to make some calls." Elias waited, his hands shaking, his mind a jumble of thoughts. The sergeant came back a few minutes later, his face grim. "The name Dr. Alistair Finch," he said. "He was a real person. A prominent doctor. He was found dead in his home 10 years ago, a supposed suicide. We looked into it, but the case was closed. And the name Finn Corvus. We have a file on him. A man who was a suspect in a series of arsons a decade ago. But we had no evidence. The case was dropped." Elias felt a small glimmer of hope. He wasn't crazy. He had been right all along. The police were finally listening. "But why now?" the sergeant asked. "Why are you telling us this now?" Elias didn't answer. He just looked at the letters, at the diary, at the terrible story of a man's mad ambition and a woman's dark revenge. The sergeant nodded, a slow, understanding nod. He called his men, and in a few minutes, Elias was in a police car, on his way to his old home, a team of officers with him. They arrived at the house. The front door was still ajar. The scent of burnt wood and ash was still in the air. The house was silent. They went inside, the officers with their guns drawn. They walked through the silent, dusty rooms, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. They found Finn Corvus in the living room, standing in front of the old fireplace, his back to them. He was holding a small old music box, the same music box Elias had found in the orphanage. He was winding it, a thin, tinkling lullaby filling the air. He turned to face them. In his arms he was holding the boy, Finn, who was unconscious, his eyes closed. "I knew you'd come back," Finn Corvus said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "I knew you couldn't resist." Elias stood in the doorway, his heart pounding. "Let him go, Finn," he said, his voice firm, his fear replaced by a cold, righteous rage. "It's over." Finn Corvus just smiled. "Is it? The play has one last act, and you, Elias, are the star." He opened the music box, and the lullaby played louder, a haunting melody that filled the room. He walked to the fireplace and put his hand on the mantel. He touched a brick, and with a soft click, a secret compartment opened. He took out a small, glass vial filled with a dark, oily liquid. "This," he said, "is a little something from Dr. Finch. A final gift. A final act of vengeance. This will make him forget everything. His memories of Lillian, his sense of self, his connection to you. He will be a blank slate, an empty vessel. And I will finally have what I have always wanted, the perfect ending, the perfect vengeance." Elias looked at the vial, at the terrible liquid, and he knew he had to act. He had to save Finn. He had to end this. He had to be a hero, not a coward. He had to be the brother he had always been meant to be. The final confrontation hung in the air, a tableau of terror and desperation. Elias, the police officers, Finn Corvus, and the unconscious boy, all held in a single terrifying moment. The lullaby from the music box played, its soft melody a horrifying soundtrack to the scene. "Don't do it, Finn," Elias said, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about a man's twisted obsession. It's about a man who can't let go of the past. Don't do it. Let him go." Finn Corvus just smiled, a cruel, cold expression that didn't reach his empty eyes. "It's already done, Elias. The vial is ready. The police are here. The stage is set. The final curtain is about to fall." He raised the vial to Finn's lips, and Elias knew he had to act. He lunged forward, a raw, primal scream of rage and grief tearing from his throat. The police officers, caught off guard by his sudden movement, shouted for him to stop. Elias ignored them. He had to save the boy. He had to save his sister's memory. He slammed into Finn Corvus, the two men tumbling to the floor. The glass vial flew from Finn's hand, shattering against the stone of the fireplace, its dark contents spilling out and evaporating into a cloud of thick, acrid smoke. Elias had a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a fleeting sense of victory. He had done it. He had stopped him. But his triumph was short-lived. Finn Corvus, a man with a lifetime of pent-up rage and vengeance, was a formidable opponent. He was a man who had lost everything, a man who had nothing left to lose. He rose to his feet, his face a mask of furious, unseeing rage. He grabbed Elias by the throat, his fingers like a vice. "You ruined everything," Finn Corvus hissed, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You were supposed to be the pawn. You were supposed to let me win. You were supposed to suffer, but you didn't. You fought back. You remembered. You ruined everything." Elias struggled, his hands clawing at Finn's fingers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The police officers, finally reacting, moved to intervene. One of them, a young, nervous-looking officer, moved to grab Finn. Finn Corvus, in a blind, unthinking rage, pushed him away with a savage, brutal force. The officer stumbled back, his head hitting the wall with a sickening crack. The other officers, now in a state of controlled panic, moved in. Finn Corvus, a cornered animal, was a whirlwind of violent, unthinking rage. He grabbed a heavy brass poker from the fireplace and swung it blindly, a lethal, unpredictable weapon. The officers dodged, but the living room, once a place of quiet, forgotten memories, had become a battlefield. Elias, gasping for air, saw his chance. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He had to do something. He had to end this. He saw the music box on the floor, its lullaby still playing, its lid open. He grabbed it, a desperate final act of a man with nothing left to lose. "Lillian!" he screamed, his voice a raw, desperate cry. "Lillian, please!" Finn Corvus froze. The sound of his sister's name, a name he had spent his life trying to erase, hit him like a physical blow. The rage on his face faded, replaced by a look of confusion, of terrible, heartbreaking pain. He looked at Elias, at the music box in his hand, at the face of the man who was his brother, and a single tear, a drop of water on an empty, unseeing face, slid down his cheek. "Finn," Elias said, his voice low and urgent. "Lillian loved you. She never forgot you. She always hoped you would come back. You're her brother. She loved you." Finn Corvus's body went limp. The poker fell from his hand, clattering to the floor with a final echoing clang. The rage in his face was replaced by a profound, agonizing sadness. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling. The police officers, seeing their chance, moved in, their hands on his arms, their faces grim. He didn't resist. He just sank to the floor, his head bowed, the sound of a silent, unseeing cry echoing in the silence. Elias fell to his knees, the music box still in his hands. He looked at the boy, at Finn, who was now beginning to stir. His eyes, once haunted by 1,000 ghosts, were now opening. He looked at Elias, not with a chilling, knowing stare, but with a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. Where am I?" the boy asked, his voice a whisper. Who are you?" Elias felt a pang of profound sadness and relief. The memory was gone. Lillian's memory. The part of her that had been a living ghost in his body was gone. The boy was finally free. Elias didn't say anything. He just looked at the boy, and then at Finn Corvus, who was now being led away by the police, his head bowed in defeat. The man who had been the architect of so much pain was finally in a place where he could no longer hurt anyone. The police took the evidence, the letters, the diary, the photographs. They took Finn, the boy, to a hospital, a place where he could be safe, where he could be cared for. And Elias was left alone in the house, a place of ghosts and memories of a past that had almost destroyed him. He looked at the music box, at the small, intricate carving of the girl with the missing eye. He wound it up, and the lullaby played, a soft, beautiful melody that was no longer a symbol of terror, but a symbol of love. Of a sister's love for her brother, of a love that had survived a fire, a psychological experiment, a murderous conspiracy. The story was over. Elias had finally confronted his past. He had found justice for his sister. He had saved an innocent boy. He had made peace with his memories. He had been a hero, not a coward. He had lost everything, but he had found something more important. He had found a sense of self, a sense of belonging, a sense of peace. He had found a reason to live, a reason to be. He was no longer a ghost. He was finally a man.